Mercor platform, you get matched with a contract opportunity where you get the opportunity to sort of challenge these AI models and make them better. But the domain that's most relevant and exciting and growing is code, where we're looking for a variety of different experts across all the different languages and skill sets to help make the models better.
Nice. And to give people a sense of scale, how many people have you hired, let's say in the past month or past year overall, and then maybe also specifically talk about the coding element of it?
Yeah, so overall, we've hired tens of thousands of contractors and experts in their relevant domains, with coding being a huge component of it. Call it like, one of the two or three most important kind of domain areas.
Cool. And then how did you like it feels like a interesting company to start. And I
Yeah.
think the Mercor founders, all three of you are pretty famous for being quite young as well. So how did you get into this?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I could share a little bit more about how we kind of met and the trajectory of the company, which is that, I grew up in the Bay Area and actually got close to my co-founders when I was 10 and 14. When I was 10, I met Surya in actually an elementary school, and we're competing in these, debate tournaments together. And then 14, when I met Brendan on the debate team in high school. So all three of us actually went to the same high school. And then Surya ended up being my debate partner. Brendan would travel with us. We became very close that way. And I like to joke that Surya and I actually started our first company together when we were doing, policy debate together, because we had this 50-50 equity in each other's success because it was a debate
Yeah.
partner. And we actually went our separate ways in college. So I went to Harvard for undergrad, where I studied CS, and I did a bunch of ML research. So I did that research across bio, NLP, computer vision, a bunch of different things. But I got really, really interested in labor markets because I was doing work with Larry Summers at the time, who's obviously now on the OpenAI board and also an investor in Mercor. So actually, when we started working together, we noticed an opportunity to match exceptional people with the right kind of jobs. And we had built an initial platform primarily based in India, but over time we got more and more folks from the US on it that would essentially automatically review resumes, conduct interviews, and match people with opportunities. But recently we noticed a very fascinating trend where the AI labs were looking for tens and thousands of highly skilled individuals to make the models better at various coding domains, among other domains. And our platform was very, very well equipped to kind of serve that use case. So this is a little bit of context on how we started and what the company does today.
So maybe help me understand like who are the types of people who well, how about let me ask this question. If you're in the audience and you have done something with Mercor, either you've applied or maybe you've even gotten a job on Mercor, maybe like give a thumbs up or put something in the chat just to see if there are folks here who are familiar. And while that's happening, maybe others give us like what is a standard profile of the folks who you have hired? Like where do they live? How many years of experience do they have? What are they looking to achieve by getting a job in Mercor?
Yeah, so the nature of it is that within coding, there's just a variety of kind of different profiles of people and different needs. So I think maybe one thing I can start off with is the different needs by skill set or coding domain, right? Where we have placed engineers who are familiar with Rust, Python, Go, Java, C++, all of these kind of different languages to help make the models better, firstly. And secondly, is we've also placed people across a variety of different levels of expertise, right? Everything from a new grad software engineer who just has basic Python experience to engineers who have literally been staff engineers at Twitter, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, people who have founded their own companies and been CTOs who have super, super impressive backgrounds where their expertise is really, really valued by the AI labs as they make models better at coding in all of these different domains.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me because, I feel like we've done, others we've chatted offline about like the different opportunities for engineers, and a lot of people on Taro have actually done this kind of work. It feels to me like a very different modality. It's not like a W-2 job where you go work at Fang and you get RSUs and get a big salary. This is much more kind of, contract based. you do the job for like a few weeks at a time, then you might not work for a bit, you do it again. So I'm kind of curious, what do you envision as the like, is there a persona that you think is really well suited for this? Like people who have a full-time job and then they're doing this on the side, or you want people to do it full time? Like, who do you think is a good fit for this?
Yeah, well, the reality is that Mercor opportunities are available for everyone across different levels of availability. So we have a variety of engineers who have full-time jobs at the Googles, Meta, Twitters, Netflix of the world, where they'll do 20 to 30 to 40 hours of Mercor work on the side, depending on how intense their full-time job is. And a lot of the feedback that we get is it's actually just really enjoyable to do coding related work on Mercor because the problems are really hard. And that's largely a function of the models being really, really good. So there's everything from people like that to people who are maybe transitioning job opportunities and don't currently have a full-time job who use Mercor as basically a mechanism to make what's close to a full-time income. So we have everybody on both ends of the spectrum essentially.
And then let's talk more about the actual job. So, what exactly are these engineers doing when they get the offer on Mercor and start, 10, 20, 30 hours a week?
Yeah, so there's a variety of different formats that engineers would be working on, and it largely depends on what data type that they're working on to make the models better. For example, RL related data types have different form factors for engineers than call it supervised fine tuning, which is largely prompt completion pairs. So maybe I can just give a couple of examples of what
Sure,
the
yeah.
like. So, for example, you might get a highly complex prompt to implement something in a coding domain. Say, hey, make the model better. Hey, implement this script in TensorFlow to do X, Y, and Z. And then you, as an engineer, might need to pick between four different options, which one is actually correct at answering that question or executing that action. That's one example. Other use cases are largely more interactive, where you can see within the annotation platform what code actually compiles and doesn't, and what passes unit tests and what doesn't. And it's your job to actually correct errors to make those use cases work properly. For other use cases, for RL related ones, you might have to define what we call a rubric, which is different evaluation criteria for why, a model might be right or wrong at answering a specific question and what the ideal response to that question looks like. So there's a variety of different ways that engineers will interface with the Mercor platform depending on the data type, use case, and language. But the feedback that we get from engineers is that it's really, really fun because the problems are hard and interesting.
And then maybe downstream of the actual work, why? So the customers are mostly these like big, you know, billion dollar, tens of billions of dollars AI labs like OpenAI, Anthropic, et cetera, right? So why are they paying all this money for this data? Like help us like understand where this data is going.
Yeah. Well, the reason that they are paying for I mean, it's actually more so the human expertise, is because in order to take model capabilities to the next level, we need really, really sophisticated experts in relevant domains to help push the frontier and push capabilities, right? Where if you want to make the model better at some niche component of Rust, in order to kind of capture that long tail, you need an expert in that domain to do that, right? And these are this is data that's not readily available on the internet, or there might be some specific use case or tool use or long context or multi-turn, and the list goes on. But to make the models better at all those different permutations of things, you need human expertise. So that's why the labs are so interested in finding expert software engineers like all of yourselves to make the models better. And why are humans a huge component of it? The reason humans are a huge component of it is because oftentimes the problems are so challenging that the researchers don't know how to solve them themselves, right? Where if you are trying, going back to that Rust example, want to make the model better at Rust and you don't know Rust yourself, you might have to talk to the Rust expert to understand where the model is deficient and how to make the model better. So this is largely a human problem that requires human expertise and sophistication, which is why the labs are so interested in bringing on expert engineers to help drive model capability.
So, I mean, if I were to push you on that though, it kind of feels um like I'm working myself out of a job, right? Like I'm doing all this work, I'm doing this Rust, I'm pointing out how the model could get better at Rust. And then very soon, I don't know if it's going to be in 6 months or a year or 5 years from now, the model will probably be better than me at Rust. So how do you think about the longevity of this kind of work?
Well, the nature of this is that software engineering work as we know it will just change super significantly over time, where a lion's share of software engineering work in the next several decades will be training, testing, and challenging AI models, right? Where more and more software engineers will be considering this type of work normal, potentially even full-time work. And those who contribute right now will be getting ahead of the curve. So that's the first thing. So contributing to training, testing, and AI models will become the norm for software engineers. Now, the second thing is just like we've seen other kind of levels of abstraction in software engineering, this will just be another kind of level of abstraction, right? Everything from assembly to Python to roughly LLMs now being able to make anyone fluent at a baseline level in all these different languages, which means that the nature of engineering work will now turn into kind of an orchestration problem for those leveraging agents. And who has the product intuition, engineering intuition, system architecture intuition to leverage these agents to actually produce something amazing and do it in a way that's kind of 100x compared to what was done before will be kind of, those engineers will be the ones that succeed. So I think I'm actually more and more optimistic about engineering in the long term because at the end of the day, with every technological revolution, with every abstraction, there's come abundance and opportunity for engineers to leverage the new tools to 100x output.
Hmm. Um, Before we continue, I just wanted to drop a note. For people who are listening, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat just so people can upvote or like thumbs up on other people's questions so we can have that in a little bit. So one thing you said, Adarsh, is that yeah, like there's potentially a vision of the future where the majority of people are actually doing this kind of AI training work rather than the traditional job that we have today. And that is super interesting. And my immediate reaction is that I'm a little bit scared because I'll tell you why. When I think back at my time at Meta or Pinterest, I think a lot of the career satisfaction I got came from getting feedback and working really closely with my coworkers, like these really smart people. And also there was some sense of career trajectory, right? Like you go from mid-level to senior engineer, then you get promoted hopefully to staff engineer, and you kind of keep going. There's all these like career paths laid out for you. And my understanding of how these jobs on Mercor work today is that you don't really get any of that, right? Like, there's not as much like feedback given to you on here's what you could do better, or here's how you could, you know, better train the model or better work with other people. And it doesn't seem like there's as much predictability in what kind of jobs will be available a month, let alone 6 months or a year from now. And so I'm kind of curious if you like, do you think the type of work that Mercor or other companies will offer in that department of training AI labs will evolve to accommodate the thing that I just said, or that is going to be how we have to deal with the fact that that part of the job will not be as prevalent in this future that you're talking about.
Well, the interesting thing is that this whole kind of category of work is largely new. So those questions such as what does career advancement look like are actively kind of being figured out. But we already are seeing really, really fascinating components of that, right? Where someone joining a project with a lab might start off at an entry level, but then once they build up a rapport with the other contributors to that project, and generally do good work on the project, they could get quote unquote promoted to a reviewer on the project. And if their reviewers does a really, really good job, we even had cases of those reviewers getting hired full time by the AI labs to kind of manage the operations of these projects. So that's kind of like one example of, career trajectory. But over time, as post AI economy work changes as we know it today, we might even have to change the definition of what career progression even looks like, right? As more and more engineers kind of take on this type of work. And that's something that will naturally just evolve over time.
Yeah, I mean, it feels both exciting and a little bit scary. How much transferable knowledge is there between these projects? So let's say I do a random, something with Rust, and then I do another one a month or two later. Would any of the skills or the knowledge I picked up in that project translate over to make me more productive or better in the next project?
It could. I mean, if you do a great job on a single Rust project, it's sort of like you going pretty deep, right? On a specific domain or project. And along with, going horizontally wide as well, if you do Rust project, Python project, Java project, and a C++ project. So I think the general philosophy I have is that it's a phenomenal way to cultivate your skills in a specific coding domain. And that in the same way that doing leak code makes you better at algorithms, or building a bunch of full stack apps makes you better at building full stack apps. And engineers who do a large number of human data projects tend to actually just develop the skill set over time, by the function of just getting repetitions in.
Maybe let me ask it another way. I think what you said makes sense. What is Mercor doing, or is it a priority for Mercor to figure out retention for engineers? Because if I'm committing my time, like I'm spending a month working 20 hours a week, is there any sort of like karma system within Mercor to say, hey, like get this guy a job faster or pay him more next time because we've validated his skill set? Like, what are you thinking about in the department of like retention?
Absolutely. In fact, actually, this is one of Nina's main focus areas right now, which is we have mechanisms to identify who the most impactful engineers are on the Mercor platform, who submit high quality data, who train, test, and challenge AI models effectively, who got amazing feedback from peers at the AI labs. And a huge initiative of ours is to reward them and retain them, essentially ensuring that they have a constant stream of work across different projects if that's what they want, or within specific, projects. And also just like an ability to voice things that they would like to see or enjoy, in a more kind of structured format. So we're actually rolling out a retention program on the Mercor platform in the next several weeks. We're already actually piloting an initial version, that's not visible on the platform yet, but the engineers and experts who are a part of it already know that they're a part of it. So there should be some really, really cool work on that soon.
Nice, super cool. When I do a project, how much, like you mentioned, like at the end of the day, the work is being consumed by these AI labs. How much interaction do people typically have with the staff at the actual AI lab? Because I think a lot of people probably are interested in that kind of like learning or interaction.
Generally varies from project to project and from lab to lab. There's some cases where there's a hands-on component. There's some cases where there's not much interaction, but the trend we're seeing is, really the experts are thought partners to the researchers, right? Where going back to the example I gave about Rust, or even generalizing to any domain, these areas where experts are kind of trying to improve model capabilities can often be sufficiently complex or niche where you just have to talk to that person directly to make the models, better, right? And that's kind of what we're seeing as like a broader trend.
On the topic of human interaction, I did my homework a little bit and I looked on Reddit or other forums online about Mercor. And one of the things that does come up a lot is, hey, I like uh, did this AI interview that was really interesting or cool or creepy, whatever you want to call it. And then I never heard back. So I'm curious, like, what actually happens? I think I've gotten that question too. What is actually happening when I do this 15-minute interview or whatever ends up happening? And I'm in the Mercor system. Is how much transparency, how much contact should I expect from the Mercor team?
Yeah, actually, one of our main initiatives going forward is to ensure that every single person hears back in a timely manner.
Mm.
Uh, the reason that response times can kind of vary across projects is projects start at different times, right? There might be a project that starts one day after you see the application, and there might be a project that starts 1 month after you submit your application. So that lead time actually makes it a little bit tricky to send consistent communications about whether you've been accepted or rejected just immediately. And that's kind of one of the challenges that we've been solving with kind of smoothing out that entire system. And it's a huge priority of our team to make sure that regardless of the project and when it starts, anyone can sort of hear back. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, part of the work that we've been doing is also improving our email deliverabilities, because a lot of times we'll have candidates who get a rejection email or even an acceptance email and it'll just go to spam, right? So those are all kind of kinks that we're trying to iron out over time to make sure that every single candidate, hears back. And if you have any inquiry about any project or any part of the platform that's working or not working, you can always reach out to support@mercor.com to help.
Okay, I actually didn't know that. That's good. I will start passing that email along. Uh, we've been talking about coding. I'm curious about the demand for coding or engineering data for training LLMs versus other domains? 'Cause I know Mercor is also hiring like consultants or bankers or lawyers, et cetera. Um, how do you think about the demand for what everyone here mostly is focused on, which is coding, versus other domains, and how do you think that'll change over time?
Yeah. I think the reality of it is that there's going to be demand across all the different domains for a long period of time. Maybe the way that I could put it is that as long as there are areas where models can be more economically productive, they could accomplish more. We'll always have the need for human expertise in those areas, whether it be coding, which, as you guys know, software engineering and just software is a huge component of just the economy today, or something like consulting or something like finance. So the reality is that we'll be pushing the frontier across all of those different domains for a long, long period of time. But coding will be, one of the main um, areas that people can contribute for several decades.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's unique about coding relative to like medicine or law is that there's a self-verifiability to coding, which is actually really amazing. And I imagine that actually helps a lot with model training, is that you can write some Rust code or you can look at it and you can just literally compile it, or you can run it through a computer to see the output in a way that you can't really have that level of objective truth for other types of work. So that feels to me like a reason that we should be bullish on the value of coding, at least right now, when it comes to these kind of jobs.
That's absolutely right. And is a great observation, Rahul, where unlike, let me give you one example. If you want to make the model better at creative writing, um, actually evaluating that is much, much more subjective and difficult than, hey, I want the model to pass X, Y, and Z unit tests the first time around when I prompt it, right?
Mm.
One is verifiable, one is not, it's subjective and maybe kind of verifiable if you construct the right system and scaffolding, but it's actually a lot harder of a problem. So because of that, we're seeing the labs pour significant resources in hiring the best software engineers because in a lot of ways the problem is more bounded and progress is more measurable. So
Yeah.
yeah, just like you, I'm very bullish on coding for the next several decades.
Um, and then when it comes to the actual work, just to confirm, everything is remote, right? Like nothing requires going into an office or being physically co-located with other people for this kind of work. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
I'm just curious, like longer term, because we're in such early days here, is there a world in which that might change for people who want IRL interaction and still want the flexibility and the ability to do this kind of work, or do you feel like it's gonna stay, predominantly remote?
It'll stay predominantly remote. And I think that's one of the main appeals of it that the jobs are extraordinarily high paying, right? Over $100 an hour in a lot of cases for software engineers. They're remote, which means you can work on your own time. There's, a minimum, but you can scale up and scale down as necessary.
Mm.
Also, you get exposure to the frontier of AI, right? Where are models going? Where are models deficient? Where are models good? So these are all consistent sources of positive feedback we get from engineers who are doing this type of work on the Mercor platform.
Yeah, so you mentioned the thing about the pay rate. I'm curious. I've gotten this question, and I don't know if it's like documented anywhere. How does Mercor set the pay rate for the workers on the platform? Is it set by the AI lab and you're just basically a pass-through layer, or is Mercor dictating like, hey, here's how complicated this work is, and therefore we'll pay this much?
It's usually a collaborative process where we want the best engineers to be compensated extraordinarily well so that they feel excited to do this sort of work. So Mercor typically pushes for as high pay rates as um, possible, depending on the specific need, right? If we're looking for staff engineers who have 20 years of experience, the pay rate might be a little bit different than maybe a new grad engineer. So in that case, we might need to push for slightly higher pay rate to actually get that sort of talent engaged on the platform for a specific project.
Okay. How does Mercor make money?
Yeah, so we make money by, essentially when a customer pays us some dollar amount and then we pay out talent some dollar amount, we kind of take a cut on the payments to talent. So say if a talent makes $100 an hour, we would bill the customer slightly more than that. Um, and we're typically transparent with both sides about how much we make on a per project basis or task basis or whatever the monetization model is for a specific project.
Okay. Um, Very cool. So I have a couple questions like to wrap up at least the parts that I had written down, which is like your opinions or forecasting on how will software engineering evolve in the next 5 or 10 years. I think you're actually very well positioned, I think, to be able to share that opinion. Before we get into that, is there anything else about the mechanics of the Mercor platform that you want to share with folks here about like what they should look out for or like what they should do to get involved and start earning money on Mercor?
So first thing is the question about how software engineering will change. I mean, for me, I think it'll all just be about orchestrating things going forward, where it's just another level of abstraction. The people who succeed will be those that can leverage AI agents and tools to 100x output in a more productive way. That's the first thing. And on the topic of how people can engage on the Mercor platform, it would just be going on the explore page that Nina sent over and actually applying.
Okay. I want to double click on, yeah, so thanks, Nina, for sending that link out. I want to double click on what people can do. Okay. And this is an area for a lot of questions and frankly, anxiety for engineers. Because the fact of the matter is that even compared to 2 years ago, the way people are coding today is dramatically different and it will change even a lot more in 2 or 5 years. So if I'm a new grad, or like, let's say, 1 or 2 years of experience, what are maybe like one or two practical things I can do right now to make sure I am employable in a couple of years?
Yeah, well, I think the questions about that actually are not unique to software engineering, right? It's like just all of work and potential job opportunities, right? Where the number one question for new grads, for example, is what should I be focusing on? Is AI going to automate what I'm focusing on? So I think my general recommendation is just to stay on the frontier of AI as much as possible, right? There's that um, kind of slogan that's like, your job's not going to be taken by AI, it's going to be taken by someone who knows how to use AI. And I really, really think that that's a very, very correct interpretation of things, where, again, just like previous abstractions, this one will create new opportunity, but there is a learning curve. So as engineers, the way to succeed is to sort of be on the frontier and cutting edge of that abstraction and learn how to leverage it in a productive way.
Yeah, that makes sense. At a practical level, though, is it like, are there particular types of jobs or maybe particular side projects or particular people even that you would recommend that I should seek out in order to develop that muscle that you're talking about? Or is it just kind of very context dependent?
Well, I mean, it's just probably just building things and leveraging the AI tools to build those things, right? Is a number one way that I'd recommend doing that, right? It's just easier than ever to just set up a full stack app and build a side project. You can literally do a couple prompts on, I mean, even like Lovable now just released like a full stack integration with databases and backends with Supabase. Like literally a 10-year-old can deploy an app on Lovable now. So like what can you do if you've been in the software engineering domain for couple decades, right? So I'd say the easiest way to do it is just get going and get started. Apply to roles on Mercor, see where the frontier of AI is headed, and just be as close to the frontier as possible.
Um, that makes sense. When you think about Mercor, I'm kind of thinking about the industry as a whole. How do you think about sustainability of your own revenue and the business over the next 3 or 4 years? I think that's another question engineers will have is, hey, if I'm betting on Mercor, I'm going to work here and hopefully have a lot of opportunity in Mercor. How do you think about the stability of the contracts that you have with OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, whatever company clients you might have?
Yeah. Well, we can't speak too much to specific customers, but I think the one thing that people misunderstand is that the foundation model spend is actually largely a leading indicator for where spend will be across the entire economy, right? Where let's say you want to create an eval for software engineering, right? That eval has to be outside of model capability, of course, because the eval has to be outside of model capability. Otherwise, the eval would be largely incoherent, right? If the model could already saturate it and do it. And that's a need that doesn't just apply to the AI labs. It also applies to all the Fortune 1000 when they try to integrate AI into their own workflows, right? Where we will need human expertise in all of those different domains to basically understand, what is the stasis point for where the AI is and how can we integrate it and make it more effective. So over time, Mercor will also be serving bunch of different non-foundation lab companies. Um, and Nick, to your point about the AR being recurring, we actually typically refer to it as revenue run rate, so it would actually not be recurring revenue. But the reason that it's classified as revenue and not GMV is because contractors are actually they're Mercor contractors typically working at the different with the different labs, and also we deliver services after the fact. So revenue would be the right term.
I think what Nick is referring to is there's a big announcement that came up recently, which is that Mercor hit 500 million ARR. And so what you're saying, Adarsh, is that's not 500 million annual recurring revenue, it's $500 million of annual run rate, meaning that the expectation is by the end of 2025, Mercor has crossed 500 million in revenue, including what will eventually get paid out to contractors. Is that right?
That's exactly right, which is why when you see Brendan discussing that, my co-founder, he says revenue run rate. He doesn't say annual recurring revenue.
Okay. But then connecting it back to what you were just saying, it's not like this is okay, whatever. Let's just for the sake of making the conversation simple. OpenAI has a contract. They paid out tens of millions to Mercor. Is the idea that I think for most people here, they would assume that, okay, well, once OpenAI trained the model in that certain way, there's no guarantee they'll be back to Mercor next year and continue paying tens of millions. But what I think you're saying is that you actually have a pretty good handle on OpenAI as a leading indicator for potentially many other customers who could pay similar amounts of money to Mercor for their own AI lab, AI training needs.
Yeah, I mean, I think without speaking too much to specific labs, um, the point that I was making is more so that any company that's integrating AI anywhere will need human sophistication and expertise, right? And this is not something unique to the foundation model companies, of which OpenAI would be an example. But it's also something that applies to all of the Fortune 1000. And to your point about what does kind of the success of the company look like, one of our big initiatives is also serving customers beyond the foundation model companies because all those customers will have that need and already have that need today.
Makes sense. Okay, awesome. I think that was most everything I wanted to cover. So what I'm thinking now is we can do, if you're okay with it, Adarsh, we can just take a couple questions that I can pluck out from the audience. Or maybe what I'll ask is if anyone has a question, you can raise your hand in Zoom and then I can unmute you and you can just go ahead and ask it directly. Otherwise, I'll just kind of scroll through and there are some good questions in chat. If there are any that you found, Adarsh, that you want to answer, go ahead and just we can figure that out. Otherwise, I'll just read some.
Nope, I think we should be good. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, maybe this is a good question just to kind of counter position Mercor versus other players. Fiverr, Upwork, these platforms have been around for a long time. And to the engineer's perspective, like to the worker perspective, it may not be obvious what is actually the difference between going to Mercor and earning, like doing this part-time contract versus Fiverr, Upwork. And I think, there are companies like, other companies that might be more similar to Mercor. So can you talk about what's different and why people should maybe consider Mercor over these other ones?
Yeah, and I think the question sort of even answers itself in a little bit of a way, which is that Mercor is for true experts in their relevant domains. It's reflected in the nature of the work being extremely complex. It's reflected in the pay rate often being above $100 an hour. And it's also reflected in the way that we treat the best experts on the platform, where it's a huge initiative to retain them, make sure that they're enjoying the work, and giving them constant kind of stream of different projects if that's what they would want, which is a fundamentally different model than call it an Upwork where it's more of this kind of task-based distributed thing where it's actually really hard to get started with any work on an Upwork, right? Because you need to build some rapport and get a 5-star rating, otherwise no one will contact you for anything. It's just totally different kind of marketplace dynamics than a company like Mercor.
Srivath, you had a question. Do you want to unmute and ask it?
Yeah. Um, so sorry. Yeah, so you mentioned you were kind of transitioning to kind of domains besides like the kind of AI like foundation labs like OpenAI, like companies working in like finance, medicine, etc. So when you kind of bring like Mercor hires into these companies, do they kind of know like, okay, these are the problems that these hires need to work on, or do you work with them and say, okay, like this is how these hires can like build these models, um, or do they need that kind of like assistance on how they can help train AI?
It's a great question, and there are two kind of things I want to call out. So one is that nobody really knows what they want, right?
Mhm.
The nature of these things is that it's highly iterative, where different customers have different needs, and those needs evolve even within a specific project. So we need a model that actually accommodates that, and human expertise is kind of like a great starting point because you can always talk to the person and iterate with them and change the format and form factor. And the second thing is it depends on the customer, right? Like a more technically sophisticated customer might already know exactly what they want in some specific case, in which case we just say, hey, okay, you guys are the pros. Other customers may not. And even within the technically sophisticated customers, there may be technically sophisticated customers at some specific type of data or domain, but not another type of data or domain, in which case we'll work with them. So it's very customer to customer dependent.
Got it. So do you have like people, you have people in-house at Mercor. So do they kind of help coordinate that where they say, okay, these are the kind of problems that our hires can work on?
That's exactly right. Yep.
Okay.
One question at a more practical level, Raghu was asking about project management. So when I get into a project on Mercor, I get the offer, I'm doing it. What are the mechanisms, if any, exist for me to get help? If I like, hey, I'm kind of confused with this task, I don't really understand. Is there a project manager either from the lab or from Mercor where I can get feedback or guidance on what I should be doing?
Yeah, so typically the way that it would work is you would talk, there's typically a project kind of owner on our side that you can always reach out to, who interfaces with the customer and interfaces with experts on the project. And secondly, is there's typically also reviewers on the project. So you can always reach out to those reviewers for, inquiries about, what you want to see kind of prioritized.
Yeah. So maybe like just to add on to that, it sounds like Raghu, like there is sometimes a concern that, okay, I'm just kind of working in isolation in a bubble somewhere. It sounds like that's not the case. There is actually support infrastructure, ideally at Mercor. Support at Mercor you mentioned earlier. There's like the team lead or the project reviewer. There is infrastructure in place to be able to help people if they are confused or they have questions. Okay. Um, Daniel had a question which is kind of linked to what we were talking about earlier. If my goal is I just want to get a Mercor offer in the next 3 months, that's like my number one priority. What would you recommend that I do? Is there anything I can do?
Apply. Yeah, that really is the main thing. And don't just apply to, random projects. Apply to ones that are most relevant to your background and skill set. The best way to get started is apply.
Okay. Is there anything in the application that you can recommend for people to like stand out in the among the applicant pool?
Yeah, I mean, one interesting product initiative is we've actually moved to a more unified model where you can take these unified assessments and automatically kind of qualify for a variety of different opportunities. So in terms of standing out, it would be doing well on those unified assessments. They can either be written assessments or verbal ones, answering questions accurately, and then kind of going from there. Typically, if there's a background match and strong assessment performance, you will be given, job opportunity provided that, there's also a background